You'd have elevator music next time, Todd, from the waiting period.
Right. All right, everybody. So we're going to get started in about 45 more seconds, actually. Give the last stragglers sort of a chance to join. As I see the attendee list start to climb, which is good. Mr. Lopez, good seeing you again. I see you just joined. All right. I think we're going to get started here, folks. All right, have my little timer here. All right, so welcome everybody to the first in our webinar series that will be revolving specifically around customer, sometimes known as consumer, identity and access management, aka CIAM. Today, our topic is delivering seamless user experiences with optimized security measures. We have a few different presentations that you're going to see as part of this. We're going to try to be rather eloquent with our time and speedy. And basically, you got two speakers here. So the first is myself, Todd Rawson, CEO and Chief Strategist or Strategy Officer, as you will, for TechDemocracy. Been in the space since about 2001 from an IAM perspective itself. And then way more past that, showing the gray in my beard within overall IT. I'll hand it over to Martine, or Martine. I keep doing that. Lateris to introduce himself, and we'll go from there.
Perfect. Thank you, Todd. Yeah, Martijn Loderes. I'm the Regional Sales Director at Thales, responsible for the Americas for the Consumer Identity and Access Management practice and go-to-market. Before that, I was able to run IBM's securities practice for CIAM, as well as being part of the executive team of a company called JanRain, which was one of the CIAM platforms that was successfully sold to Akamai. With that, we are bringing a lot of knowledge with Todd and myself to the stage today. That also means that we would love to answer any of your questions that you might have or guidance that you're looking for. So as we are moving forward, let's make sure that we are getting a lot of questions into the participation boxes. When you have questions, then we'll answer them as we go through our sessions. Todd, you want to kick us off with a little bit of, let's say, programmatic guidance around how to work with CIAM?
Will do. One last thing is Martine was saying is that anytime you have a question, feel free to pop it into the Q&A box that you'll see above. Well, depending where on your screen, it may be below, maybe above. And we will get to those questions at the worst case scenario. We're trying to reserve a section at the end of this presentation to go through questions. If it makes sense to do them during the presentation, as things progress, we'll try to address them at that time as well. All right. Having said that, let's get right into it. Excuse me. Hold on 1 second. There we go. A little bit of technical difficulty. So, as was stated, I'm going to start with a process that we as an organization recommend that organizations themselves take a look at in order to plan properly where they want to go from a CIAM point of view. While that sounds a little vague, we will get into the details here to give you a little idea of specifically what that means. But the core behind this is that our success rates we have seen with the customer base go through the roof if they do a similar process. So I'm going to give you an idea of what this process looks like, walk you through it, and then we'll get post this into some of the nitty-gritty on CIAM specific topics as well. So the goal of this is to understand what we should be focusing on, where we should be focusing on, when basically can we take this to market from a success standpoint, production worthy. Why do we need to maintain this going on as opposed to plug and play, forget about it, never have to go back again? And then what's this really going to cost us at the end of the day to both implement and then manage? And these are the questions we want to make sure we get answered before we go down this road so that there's no surprises as we go on. There's no management going, that's not what we wanted, it's not what we expected, etc. I like to call it covering ourselves. You can take that to the next level, what that means. Measuring the organization CIAM security, CIAM maturity tends to be the first step within this process. And it is a three-step process that gets us to 3 stages on how we can then deliver. So first, are we as an organization positioned for a successful implementation, a change, or a fix? So we have to ask ourselves some questions in this regard. Where are we from a maturity perspective when it comes to CIAM? And what you'll notice here is this is not necessarily any different from, say, your workforce IAM when you're talking overall from a maturity model perspective, but there are some core differences here. Some of them are that it typically is more business driven from a regulatory and compliance standpoint as well. And as a result, a lot of organizations tend to fall into these first 2 levels, where things such as different vendor tools, et cetera, have either been built or implemented on a piecemeal basis. So on the back end, we have multiple systems doing this, and it leads to a lot of issue as a result. The governance around this tends to be a little more ad hoc, a little more informal, as CIAM for a lot of organizations is still relatively new. Or I should say evolving. The other piece of it is we tend to buy the same things over and over again to do the same tasks. We have to be careful with that so that we don't have 3 systems in the back end doing what realistically one could be doing, that we're paying 3 times over and that we have to manage 3 times over. So we need to be careful about that. The goal of this process is to get a governance model, an overall architecture model, the stakeholders, et cetera, built into the overall CIAM vision so that we have sign off, we can take this forward. And when we take it forward, the stakeholders that need to be involved, and that's everybody from upper management into operations and all in between, have an understanding of what the plan is, what the execution is, the when, the whys, the hows. Having said that, even once we build this out and we get to what I will call this optimized level, we can't rest our laurels there because things continuously change. Open banking, AI, I mean, new regulations, other identity providers, et cetera, these are popping up constantly. The typical rule of thumb within cybersecurity is never plan beyond 36 months because that's the worst case scenario of how fast things will change in this industry. AI, for example, where was that 36 months ago? Nobody was really talking about it. You can keep going back, everything from immutable ledgers, and you can look at the same cycle and prior, et cetera, everything no longer than about 36 months. So you have to be aware of what is going on, where things are, and you need to refactor this. So that gets us to step 2. How do we determine that we're focusing on the right things? So I like to call this the jellyfish. So here's the thing about a jellyfish. When you look at a jellyfish from the top down, what do you see? Well, it's pretty straightforward. What typically happens is you see this big billowy item. In this particular case, when it comes to CIAM, it seems pretty straightforward. Look, the end goal is we want to make sure that the right customer is getting access to the right things at the right times, at the right resources, and that, and for the right reasons, and that we can prove that from an audit, regulatory, et cetera, compliance. Having said that, we have to make sure that we define and understand what that means as an organization. So we have consumer identity, and I'll get into the details on that, but registration, a few other key pieces that come behind this. You'll see this shortly. Profile and consent management, and that's where we heavily involve the customer in the management of their own data and their own consents. And then threat detection and prevention. AKA, are we being good stewards of the data? Are we making sure that we're both doing a preventative and detective model engagement to make sure that we don't have breaches, that we don't have security flaws readily available, et cetera? So again, the thing about a jellyfish is it looks pretty easy when you see it until you turn a jellyfish on its side or you look at it from the bottom, take your pick, because guess what happens? We got a lot of tendrils that come into play. As stated, consumer identity, the core pieces behind it, everything from those registration options, profile verification, the actual life cycle of the consumer, whether it be their profile, consent data, et cetera, how we are making sure that they're secure from an authentication and even authorization approach. And you see there are sub pieces to each one of these. The rationale behind it being that you'll never get them all. There's a lot as it keeps changing over time, and I'll show you what we mean by that. But you want to really dig in and get as much as you can. Some will be checkbox items. Some will be, we're there, we have problems, we haven't even thought of it. Three key pieces that you'll see that now are added to this is under consumer identity. What does that mean? Well, B1 organization, I'll show you on the next slide. Threat detection and prevention. Again, are we locking down that data? Are we making sure the APIs are secure and that we're managing them properly? How are we managing our overall access organization and controls around it? How deep do we need to go from both an authorization and an authentication standpoint? And then knowing our customer, the profile and consent and management. Again, how are they managing their own profile, preferences, consents? Do we give them the ability to opt in and opt out as required? How are we doing audit, compliance, et cetera, and the governance around it? So each one of these is an additional slide. I can go relatively quickly, but we will send this out to everybody who attends as well, if you would like. That one organization, and this isn't even everything, this is from a high level point of view. We want to make sure that we're reducing our overhead and complexity because we don't want to cause friction when it comes to our user base. We got a lot of users, a lot of customers. Least amount of friction with the highest level of security that can be maintained. That is the goal. How are we registering? Can we support an identity validation model? Do we need to, obviously? And then once we do, can we support it? Just getting information, who cares? Social registration, social identity. But when we need to dig in and we need to make sure that we understand that we have the right customer and these bleed over into each other, that's a key piece because Todd 1 shouldn't be able to see Todd 2's data and vice versa. All right. How the consumer can centrally control their consent. We've already touched on this briefly, so I'm going to jump to the next. We need to be improving our user experience through a single maintainable set of credentials as best as possible. If an organization has multiple backend services and even microservices, you want to still, at best, maintain a single set of credentials, even if that requires additional validation, verification, et cetera, to some of the sub-services. And then making sure that as new forms of authentication are presented, we have the ability to be flexible and nimble in this process. How to know your customer. We have to recognize that we have the right customer. As stated prior, Todd 1, Todd 2, never the two shall meet in the sense that we want to make sure that I cannot see another Todd Rawson's data regardless. Consents, privacy, anything to do with their account and vice versa. So we have to make sure we have those precise customers and the process behind it so that there is no bleed over ever. Identity validation, I told you these bleed over into each other, these three. Again, we have to make sure, not just from an authorization standpoint, but the proofing piece of it, the verification. There are services, third-party services that may be involved. There's all kinds of potential and options there. Always improve your user experience. I say always. It's sort of like the old sales model, ABC, always be closing, always be improving. We should say this as well. The reason being that even when we think we have it super easy with a little bit of friction, there's always improvements that can be made. And as technology changes over time within the CIAM space, you need to be aware of that. And we have to be fast with those changes. And then our compliance. Our compliance is sort of a key factor with most organizations, not all, but most, but with the regulations that are out, depending on your country, countries, etc. You have to understand what those regulations around consent, around beyond even consent, data and data management, data security, and really just a host of options.
Hey, Todd,
Last
we
but not
already got a couple of questions, and before you go on, I actually have one for you on that previous slide, if I may.
okay.
So from your know your customer perspective, right, what do you feel when you're deploying CIAM is the one that takes the most time or effort from an organization?
I hate to do this to you, but I think right now I have to kick that one to just a little bit later because we're almost done with this piece of it, which talks about really something that may help answer the question, which is my last slide. So I'm gonna actually
Perfect.
have to put you on pause on that one. We're gonna go through the last slide and then we can go into it simply because at that point in time, I think it will help to show you what those options are, what needs to be in place, because I'm gonna walk through everybody how to do a successful implementation.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and then promise we'll get back to it.
Okay.
So again, last piece of this is securing that data as stated, taking action on the logs that we are, or the monitoring that we're doing, the audit, the compliance. Too many organizations, they get these notifications when something comes up and they do nothing with them. We have to make sure that we are taking action when something comes into focus that is an issue. So let me jump. Here's the thing about jellyfish, guys. They have little jellyfish. So as I was stating before, there's still more that keeps coming up. And it goes deeper from the consumer-focused compliance. You see your zero trust-driven services, open banking and fintech regulation and compliance. I'm not going to go through each one of these pieces. However, you'll see some of the things still bleeding over, and that's why I have the colors mixed between the three core competencies. The goal being, again, to understand what it is we need to tackle and where we need to tackle this. So now I'm up to that last part, as I was stating, and again, I will get this presentation out to folks at the end of this, but executing a strategic assessment, how do we succeed in this? It's really a three-stage process. The first being that we need to understand what the organization itself wants and needs, always important. We have to balance that with what does the customer need. Now, this may, again, fall into compliance, regulatory compliance and the like, but what is it the customers need? What does the organization need as well? What is working today? What is not working today? The reason we want to do this is we can then analyze our current CIAM state, understand long-term what we can and can't do, and then what are the issues and complications that we have identified. The reason for those is what happens if we don't fix those. I realize there's things we need and want, but also when we find issues, we have to be on top of those. And some of them may be very low from a risk perspective. Some may be very high. So we want to understand the risks of doing nothing or the costs of doing nothing in this. Last but not least is we can then take that information and we can rank it, because as you'll see in just a second, there's really two ways to go about this. So once we understand what are the things that need to be now versus in the future, we can jump into stage two, which says build requirements for those needs, those wants, but also to mitigate these issues. Take those, build out a future state set of architectures that includes what are our constraints and dependencies. In order to do this reference architecture model, we have to pretend three things don't exist. You don't have enough time, money, resources, the three things. We know that. Nobody does. Pretend they don't exist so it doesn't hamper what we're building. Build out, here's what this would look like from a future state perspective. And now we can run a gap analysis that says need, want, or issue, requirement, current state, future state. So we know how to get there and full line traceability. And then what we can do is go roadmap, and this is where it gets interesting. What we have now is what can we do? Not what should we do, but what can we do? We put in our constraints, not enough money, time, or resources. Pop those back in, and guess what? Now we can build a roadmap because we know what we have, what we can do, what's it going to require in the sense of an order perspective, an order of operations, and we could build out a full swim lane roadmap to take execution on. And when we do that, every little box on those roadmaps should have a built-out set of work breakdown behind it. What are the constraints and dependencies, the timelines to get it done, the tasks. Now, granted, it may not follow exactly the dev test prod model as you have it. It may not. That's fine. But what are the tasks to get it done, get it into a production-ready mode, and back out to your consumer base? What are the resources required to get this done for your organization? And even percentages. Maybe it's a half-time PM, a half-time architect, 1.5 engineers, whatever that may be. The timelines, obviously, what are the outputs and deliverables required, and then you can cost and budget this behind it. Now you have a plan. The last thing you need to do is figure out what is the technology behind it. Do you own it? Do you need to procure? What are the options? The 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever makes sense to fulfill this set of use cases that are now out. And what are the rest that don't make sense so that you don't have questions that pop up if you can identify those? Last thing being, great, now we're live. How do we manage this? In some cases, does it take care of itself? Likely nothing takes perfect care of itself. So how do we manage it from an operational point of view? AKA the care and feeding. That is the last core slide, and then I'll get into the questions. The reason I'm showing this is I will send you this information that has a little more about us, etc. at the end. I'm going to stop the share right now, and now I think I can go back to the questions. So I'll start with you, Martin. Do you want to ask that question again?
Yeah, I was just wondering from your experience, right, running and deploying CIAM projects, what element of a CIAM project from your jellyfish would you say takes the most time, or takes the most, let's call it, different departments to work together to get it solved?
Definitely in the design phase, I'll call it. So that first set of steps that I showed, that's where we're going to get an understanding of not just from an issues, but also technical specifications, including, so for example, a unified customer experience model that we want to push across both, say, mobile and web, as an example. The functional requirements, such as ease of authentication that needs to be there for applications with, say, and I'm going to just throw these out there, but say social identities, or a BYO authentication model, government-driven or other identities. So your different IDPs and external repositories. You're going to have requirements around things like consent management, enforcement and compliance, contextual authentication. So we're talking SSO and MFA there potentially in the mix. Well, more than potentially, ideally. And those know your customer requirements around your identity verification, if these things apply again. And whatever your levels of authorization that need to be in place. The reason I'm saying this way is requirements, technical specifications, and the like typically fall within that design phase, which is really your first stage in this process.
Gotcha. I got a question also from Shri. Is there a way to track how the access to resources are being utilized? Meaning, is there an intended purpose met, or a threat entering of a consumer going into certain environments?
So I have a quick question, not question, excuse me, a pushback, I should say, because I hate answering question with a question. But Martin, is this part of your track, or do we want to answer that now and move this towards the end?
So it's a good comment in the sense that I will talk about the security aspects of the user experience and the engagement. So I'm happy to come back to that. If I want to answer it from my side as well, as regards to consumer engagement, usually means self-registration, self-service, right? So as an organization, you need to be careful in any case with regards to an open experience that you are disclosing business applications and business data, to be able to take into consideration that anybody can sign up, right? And of course, you can put some kind of trust assurance measures like identity proofing in place to be able to make it safer. But be careful, as is my first intent to respond to that question with regards to what you're actually exposing in a public domain with an open registration experience. Another question, Todd, maybe you can help answer as well, which is, who of your organization should be involved in making changes to a digital user experience?
Oh, wow. I mean, there's a fair number of folks that need to be identified. I actually have a preface to that, which says you should be creating some form of council or board. I have for organizations set up a we'll call it the digital user experience board or something similar within this that states, here are the core participants needed. That may include um, the application owners themselves, the marketing or digital user experience folks within the organization, information security, although it's not necessarily a part and parcel of the user experience, should at least have a seat at the end of the table to make sure everything flies, similar to what you would do with like an architectural review board. So as a result, first and foremost, I'd always recommend going after that type of approach where you build more of a board model first and foremost so that you can not just identify the stakeholders, they have a seat at this board and you meet regularly. And that's the key, because otherwise what happens is it becomes very, or it remains somewhere it's ad hoc in nature. And that's what we're trying to get out of.
Yeah, and it's also a good way to keep the agility and speed going, right? When it comes down to making changes. Um, Good. So first of all, when we were talking about digital experience changes, so I'm gonna pick up from here, being able to talk a little bit about what kind of user experiences improvements are coming, as well as how some of those experiences will actually improve our security measures as well. So let me start sharing here. And the first thing I'm going to say is don't look up, right? Because passkeys are coming. So basically, web services have evolved really, really fast, right, over the years with regards to how we interact with them, how we shop with them, how we watch streaming videos. And basically, our lives are now fully entwangled with regards to our social media and the way that we are interacting with each other. But interestingly enough, there's one thing that has actually not changed over those 30 years, which is actually this username password type of experience where a lot of people are being able to log in with Hotmail or with their AOL account using a username and password, right? But at the end of the day, this is how it is still today for most of the experiences that we're engaging with, right? Which is a user ID or password or an email ID and password to be able to get access to the profiles that we've established. So basically, passwords therefore have been there forever, almost like the dinosaur age, right? It's been there everywhere. And they're actually pretty scary because we're hearing all these breaches in the market with regards to, hey, this company was hacked and this data was exposed. And as such, we have all these kind of neat solutions. For instance, that we get security recommendations in our password managers to say, hey, these passwords have been compromised or these usernames and passwords have been compromised. You need to change them. You need to be able to do that. But is that really the way we want to solve this problem, right? And in 2022, actually, an asteroid hit the world that is going to change the way we looked at the dinosaurs in the WWW world, right? With regards to Apple and Microsoft and Google all working together. And it will still, and basically what will happen with this asteroid, it will be able to basically bring our passwords to extinction. And how does that going to work? Well, basically, we're marking the start of an era which we call passkeys. And passkeys basically is a standard that we're all starting to adopt and to be able to start moving away from this username password type of behavior in the user experience. And if you don't believe me, just don't look up, meaning it is something that is not in our country or not with my brands or not in my type of arena, or I don't want to comply. Well, guess what? You'll actually start seeing passwords being washed away faster and faster with the different experiences that you're engaging with. And it will happen sooner than later because, for instance, the operating systems of Microsoft or Apple or others are starting to embed it and are starting to basically make that the standard in the way that they're engaging, which allows other websites and other engagements to be able to utilize that faster. And therefore, passkeys will kill passwords over time, right? It's inevitable. It's already started and it's actually happening faster and faster. You cannot go to an event right now where they're not talking about passkeys, right? And basically, it gives a better user experience. So talking about this user experience, if you never heard about passkeys, basically it means that you can create a passkey using your biometrics as a way to secure the authentication token. So when, for instance, in this example, this is with PayPal, you can create a passkey. Basically, in this case, it's on your phone, right? So basically, it asks to utilize your Face ID as a way to secure your password or your certificate, as a way to authenticate, and then it allows you to then sign up with that certificate. That means that when I'm logging in with a passkey, it basically then reuses the biometric signature, in this case, my Face ID, to be able to revalidate me, and it allows me then to sign in securely without using a username or password, right? This also means that in the case of an Android, it could be your fingerprint instead of your facial recognition. It could be, if you have an older iPhone, could also be your touch button. So it depends on what kind of technology you're using, but we're basically using biometrics as a way to secure the authentication for engaging with that environment. This also is for browsers. So for instance, with Safari, it will pop up to say, hey, you want to enter your credentials. You basically put your finger on the fingerprint reader that you have on your laptop, or if you have a keyboard with a fingerprint reader, it would work on that as well. And that means that also with regards to Google or Microsoft, it's using the same type of experiences to drive that. So, but what are passkeys actually about? Meaning, what are they? So we just talked about the user experience, and we're seeing that it's a more easier way to authenticate in by, instead of typing or remembering, I don't know, 12-character passkeys with uppercase, lowercase, exclamation marks as such. But what are they exactly? So from a consumer perspective, basically it is using biometrics to replace your passwords, right, across different devices. And it allows you to therefore easily sign in into web pages and to experiences using the biometric signature that you have, either a fingerprint, Face ID, or those kind of things. The other, from an industry perspective, it basically means that companies are starting to adopt a cryptographic credential that is standardized to the FIDO Alliance, allowing people to use these type of authentication for any type of digital service, right? And then these companies will adhere to the standards and the protocols that the FIDO Alliance has set up, right? And basically the way it works is that the user basically utilizes their device. And as I mentioned, it's using a biometric signature or PIN code, depending on how you set it up, to be able to work with the backend. And the backend basically creates two keys, one that's stored in the backend and one that's stored on your device. And that one that's stored on your device is therefore secured by your biometrics and or the PIN code to be able to allow you for a very easy, user-friendly way to get in. That means that the end of passwords is near, meaning we're getting closer, Todd, to being able to not have to go over these lists and saying, hey, my username and passwords are compromised. Well, we're starting to create a very seamless seamless user journey where security actually is already embedded based on the way that the technology is being set up. So as an introduction to that, right? How are you how are you seeing that implementation already happening, Todd, of passkeys within the engagements that you're doing?
So I was trying to hit the unmute button there. So I hate to put it this way, slowly but steadily, from a passkey perspective, I noticed a very large uptick actually in the last quarter, really, which surprised me. Both from a customer perspective for us, but also even a personal perspective. I'm seeing the shift finally happening, and more so in the last quarter than I've seen in the last year, even quite a bit, which is making me very happy.
Yeah, even as an end user, I'm seeing more and more experiences where they're asking for it, right? So from your perspective, Todd, do you see passkey as a user experience initiative for an organization to implement it, or is it a security initiative?
Oh, that one's a tougher one because realistically, where we as a professional service firm get tapped on the shoulder is at that security level. So for us, security, whether that be their own infosec or their CIAM or IAM type teams, that's where we tend to get involved. So if it goes beyond that, it's a possibility, but that's not where we tend to come into play.
Gotcha. We got some questions in the meantime coming in. Let's see. Are passkeys functionally built into the Talos CIAM platform? It seems more like business use cases to replace traditional SMS and MFA, I think, or SFA. And could it be more hassle for the end customers? Actually, it's the opposite. So let me start by answering the question in order. So yes, it's part of the CIAM platform that Talos offers, which we call One Welcome. So the One Welcome platform has the ability to enable passkeys for you. We do that either device bound, as we call it, or shared. We can have a side debate on why you would use one or the other, but basically, in principle, financial services, they want to have a device bound, and any kind of normal, let's say, less secure website is okay with a shared passkey. So both of them are optional with the CIAM platform. When it comes down to the business use case to replace traditional SMS or SFA or MFA, absolutely, this is part of what is driving people. So let me give you an example. So there is a PCI 4.0 that is being announced for next year, which is if you're dealing with any kind of financial transactions, you need to have multi-factor authentication in place. So as you're doing that anyway, to be able to either implement SMS, or you're implementing a magic link, or you're implementing some kind of QR code, this is also a good way to start introducing passkeys as a way to also improve the consumer experience. Because once you basically registered and you enabled passkey, any kind of authentication that could be, for instance, doing the authentication to get in, but even to confirm a financial transaction or to confirm an activity becomes easier with regards to just tapping your finger on the reader, or just using your Face ID as a way to validate, right? So yes, we are seeing a business case to replace the traditional SMS authentication methods, as well as the increase of the user experience with regards to how consumers are experiencing this going forward. Because even if I talk from a personal perspective, I hate to go back to my email account, for instance, and get the 6 or 8 digit number sequence and then paste it back into the website, instead of having just the website ask me for a fingerprint or a Face ID. Hope that answered the question. Todd, anything you wanted to add to that one? No? Okay, good.
Nope,
So next question, I'll hand over to you, Todd. So how will AI or machine learning actually change the implementation of security measures within a CIAM type of an approach?
I think realistically, it's going to allow for from a language, natural or basic language or instruction model from your CIAM admins, operators, or even realistically the guys who don't know what they're doing as well. So that we'll call it the non-CIAM information security personnel, to take their instructions, etc., and translate them into an enforced policy model within the CIAM environment. So basically making it so much simpler to set this up for information security personnel. I think that's really the biggest change I see right out of the bat, being able to do that translation where it really doesn't exist otherwise today.
No, absolutely, and we're seeing that also from a Talos platform side perspective, right, where more and more machine learning and AI type of technologies are used in first instance, actually from a security measure perspective, and but we're also experimenting with user experiences to be able to say, hey, this is what we know about you, right? Why would you still have to type it in? And also we're seeing bots, for instance, that are natural language processing in a way to engage with a brand that is not your traditional form fields, right? So more of a chatbot type of experience that also starting to come into the CIAM arena. Which is also a great bridge, actually, to talk a little bit about, as we announced at the beginning of our session, that we were talking about what are security measures and what is enhancing digital experiences, right? But from a security measures perspective, let's double click on that for a second with regards to how are you actually can strengthen some of these security engagements. As I mentioned, we're in the open domain. People can type in whatever they want. They can register with a fake name if they want to. So that means that we could have bad actors trying to engage, right? So how do you look at that? So basically, from a Thales perspective, we're looking at 4 key areas. The first one is around what is the device and network intelligence that we can derive, meaning what is the device that they're using, what is the network IP address, where is it coming from, understanding if it's a VPN or a proxy, and really understand the dynamics of that. The second thing is about the behavioral biometrics. So how are the keys being typed in, meaning how quickly is the keystrokes, or how is the clicks per second, or how is the mouse moving over the screen, to be able to really define if it's a human or a bot-like type of behavior within the experience. Then also we work together with a trust consortium. So when you're, for instance, understanding the device that you're interacting with, if it's a laptop or a mobile phone or anything like that, can we get more information about it? Meaning, is it already blacklisted? Is it jailbroken? Is it marked as stolen through different service providers? And looking at that trust consortium to give us extra information. And the last thing is, what is the actual user behavior over the overall experiences? Is it something that is normal for that user to behave this way? Are they walking paths or clicking on things that they normally wouldn't? And trying to be able to analyze the user habits. And basically that includes things like what browser they're using, where they're coming from, and how they're moving over the page with regards to the different informations that they're seeking for. And the way this works is basically, when you think about a traditional registration or onboarding workflow, right? You either go through an invitation, you land on the registration experience, and then you capture PII, right? So the personal identifiable information. You might want to include identity proofing. It's a higher level of trust assurance requirement. You validate an ID, you provision the user, and you do an email confirmation as a part of, let's say, an onboarding workflow. During the onboarding landing page is where we would inject code to be able to start following all these different elements that I was just outlining, meaning we're doing the network analysis, we're doing the device identification, the behavior analysis, the biometric behavior, and testing the trust consortium throughout the journey that the user is doing with regards to their onboarding workflow. As we're doing that, we can actually make decisions, because we can do things like risk scoring to be able to either stop an engagement, ask more questions, and or let the experience go forward. So as you can see, during the user experience scenario, we're looking at the registration, and this is where we're capturing a lot of the information with regards to the device, the behavior, what is the biometric things that they're entering, right? What is the way that they're entering the information into the attributes, and also testing that with the trust consortium. Then once they've established a profile, we have now a behavioral pattern that we can also use to validate against when they authenticate against that again, right? So are they using the same device? Are they actually accessing from the same point? Are they using the same type of behavior in a way that they can go forward? And during all these type of engagements, we're doing scoring mechanisms to be able to identify risk. And this risk now allows you as an organization to be able to ask different questions, take different behaviors, reroute bots, for instance, to a different landing page. Because one of the things that we've also learned in the field is that if you stop a bot, guess what? Bots get smarter. They'll just try and change their behavior until they get to the end of the registration process, right? Or at the end of the authentication process. So you need to actually, when you detect a bot, you need to route them to a different experience, giving them a sense that they've completed their journey, so that they don't try and optimize their behavior to actually get to the real journey of registration of your environment. Then from a administration perspective, once we have that user experience, you as managers of a CIAM platform want to be able to understand what kind of rules do I want to set based on the risk scoring that I'm seeing, and what kind of policies, right? So can I create these different experiences? What do they look like? What kind of policies do I want to set with retries of passwords? Those kind of things. And then last but not least, looking at the reporting with regards to how are you providing also that feedback to the organization in the way that need to maybe change the dynamic of the registration, maybe do some A/B testing with regards to being less susceptible to that, and therefore get some information around trends and attacks in the way that you can secure your user experience with that. So the way that we look at this is basically that we're looking at this as a continuous loop of getting and gathering information during registration, either through the user onboarding or the way that they're enrolling on the service or the way that they're using their device, as well as the authentication part, right? The when they're logging in, when they're transacting and updating. And we're monitoring that either for continuous strong authentication, what is the risk associated with that? And if needed, based on the use case, we can do the identity proofing as a step up or the affirmation to be able to make sure that the enhancement and the way that they're interacting is safe, right? So I have a question here. It says, in order to strengthen security, do you see that this is major or core functionality? Do you see is the major or core functionality in the implementation phase to assure the strongest security is balanced against the least user friction? So basically, it goes hand in hand. So if you're a bank, of course, there is an understanding for a end user that they have to go through some hoops to be able to open up a bank account, right? So therefore, I call it the give to get. What am I giving to be able to get something in return, right? So I know that if I'm opening up a bank account, I need to provide my social security number, right? So I'm giving that in return for the use case, which is opening up a bank account. So as long as the balance of your security measures are in line with the gift to get. So if it is just me buying a t-shirt at Gap as a retailer, right? I don't want to ask the security questions for a identity proofing flow or for a social security number, right? Interestingly enough, by the way, I cover LATAM, and in LATAM, they actually do identity proofing even when you register to buy a t-shirt. But here in the United States, that gift to get threshold is different. I hope that gave some clarity to how you're balancing out your strong security with regards to user friction. Anything to add here, Todd?
So for me, beyond that, from a major core functionality, what we tend to see on the pro services that they would get asked for, I should put, because this is a post to give to get once those, we'll say those requirements are given to us. The ones that we tend to see more over than not are around access orchestration from a major core functionality standpoint. So we're talking about the overall coordination or management of those systems, the applications or services that are being executed in that process or workflow, and that they're being done in such a way that is seamless for the user experience. So when we're talking about things like single sign-on, MFA, which risk-based or contextual-based MFA. The way if they're doing passwordless, what is that authentication configuration? Because you want to get rid of what I call the tedious. The goal of this is with passwordless, right? Is dump the hard to remember thing, which is my username and my password, and the even pins in favor of things that like the biometric side of the house. Which has gained so much traction in all the applications. Like I said, we're seeing more and more of them in the last quarter than ever, but more and more are going that route. And then what is that requirement on that authorization model behind it, and how do we manage that? And then, of course, overall API security. The only other key pieces is typically around session management, federated, how we're doing our federated identity management, and the consent enforcement itself. These tend to be for us what we get tapped on the shoulder for that major or core functionality that is being requested post security or security and user requirements.
Understood. So one of the things that I have another question here, which I'm starting to see more and more of, which is around identity proofing, right? So basically validating who you are either through a selfie and then scanning a driver's license or passport to be able to validate that, right? So if you're, for instance, flying with an airline, it's now becoming almost standard that when you're checking in, you have to scan your passport if it's international, as an example. So identity proofing is a great way, of course, to increase the trust assurance. And the question here is around it is friction, right? And how do you onboard people with high conversion rates while you need to increase your trust assurance, right? So how would you best balance that with regards to understanding the identity proofing part, as well as having, let's say, high conversion of people signing up and doing that? There's two parts, at least, that I would like to answer this. The first one is that if the use case is in line, again, the gift you get, like for instance, me checking in for an international flight and they're asking for identity proofing with my passport, it is not too much friction and there will not be as much drop off. If it is out of line, meaning like what I'm seeing, for instance, in Latin America, where there's a lot of identity proofing just to be able to sign up for organizations like Amazon, as an example, it is something that I would say be careful with, or to use alternative services. So for instance, you can sign up with ID.me as an example, right? Where the IRS has used them as a way to identity proof, which means you now have a provider, a service provider that knows your identity, and you can use that as a way to then authenticate against, right? So if there's other ways that you can implement identity proofing with services where people already exist, that would be another way, instead of having to implement identity proofing on your own environment, to be able to get that level of trust assurance. Todd, anything you want to add to that?
Actually, not really, because I think between what we had stated on those core services and where those fold and what you're obviously just stating as a result, I kind of think we got the answer built in, but
Okay.
very good.
It looks like we've answered the open questions so far. I would like to give the audience still an option to ask more questions. Just to recap, Todd has been talking about his approach with regards to what you need to take into consideration with regards to a CIAM program, how you test your maturity using the jellyfish methodology. I've been talking about user experiences being optimized while adding security with passkeys. And we talked about how to measure security and keep your engagement safe by monitoring the actual engagement through either human behavior, network behavior, or device behavior. If there's any further questions on the topics we addressed today, please let us know. Then we're happy to answer that. Otherwise, we'll be happy to take on questions after we end our webinar today.
I'll also, if it's okay, I'm going to pull back to Shree's question from prior. I kicked some of that out at the time because as predicted, your presentation answered quite a bit of it. I also put some answer in the answer section there under Q&A for you as well, Shree. But basically, I'll reiterate this real quick with the answer. And it said, is there a way to track how the access to resources are being utilized? Is the intended purpose met, or threat entering as consumer? I wasn't sure about that last piece, but essentially the CIAM solution itself, and this is what I stated, they allow you, the good ones will say, the proper ones, to collect the data from interactions with your organization's website, apps, partner apps, etc., which is what I saw there in Martine's presentation. The purpose being that now you can pull in that consumer profile data, which allows you to lessen the overall customer friction, because you're pulling that in instead of having to ask them for specifics that you could otherwise pull out of the solution. The other piece of it being then that it allows you to track, or it should allow you to track and manage those services under the covers as well, to make sure they're live at all times, because you're going to lose customers if they're not. If you're down, it impacts the customer. So we want to make sure that not only is that happening, but that we're not just preventive, but not just detective, excuse me, but preventative in nature. I didn't know if you had anything else you wanted to add on that one.
No, that's I think that's a great way to wrap that up. That's it then for today. If there's no further questions, we really appreciate your attendance for today. Of course, you can reach out if you want to know more about the Thales One Welcome platform for CIAM, as well as some of the technologies that we offered. You can reach out either through TechDemocracy as one of our partners, and or directly to the Thales resources. Thank you so much for your time. Todd, last words for you.
The same, feel free also to link into either one of us. We're always happy to put our geek hats on and to talk through this. And you can reach out to me direct at todd.rawson@techdemocracy.com or the organization at solutions@techdemocracy.com as well.
Perfect. Todd, thank you for being here with me here today as well. I've enjoyed doing this together, and let's create the next one, right?
Sounds good. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.